A young nurse adopted a dying patient's cat, only to inherit their secret fortune. A sentence that would have sounded like fiction to Emma Winters just 6 months ago, when her life had been a blur of 12-hour shifts, instant noodles, and the constant weight of student loan notices in her mailbox. Now, standing in the empty hallway of St. Mercy Hospital's palliative care unit, Emma pressed her forehead against the cool window glass and watched rain streak down the pane, distorting the city lights below into a watercolor of blues and yellows. The night shift stretched before her, quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the occasional squeak of orthopedic shoes on linoleum. 3 years into nursing, and the hallways still felt too long, the rooms too full of stories ending too soon. She tucked a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear, feeling the familiar ache in her shoulders, the physical manifestation of carrying other people's pain while trying not to let them see the weight of it. Room 412 was her next stop. Mr. Harrison. Terminal pancreatic cancer. Estimated time remaining, weeks, maybe days. Emma gathered herself, straightening her scrubs before entering. The soft glow of a bedside lamp illuminated the room, casting long shadows across the walls. In the bed lay Albert Harrison, 72 years old, his once broad frame now diminished, cheekbones sharp beneath paper-thin skin. But what caught Emma's attention was the small, orange tabby cat curled at the foot of the bed, strictly against hospital regulations. "I was wondering when you'd make your rounds," Albert said, his voice gravelly but warm. "Don't worry about Oliver. He's cleaner than most of the doctors here." Emma should have reported it immediately. Instead, she found herself closing the door behind her. "Mr. Harrison, you know pets aren't—" "Albert, please." His blue eyes, startlingly bright against his pallor, crinkled at the corners. "And yes, I'm aware of the rules, but Oliver and I have an understanding. He doesn't make trouble and I don't die alone." The bluntness of his words caught Emma off guard. Most patients danced around their prognosis, but not Albert. His directness was as refreshing as it was heartbreaking. "How did you even get him in here?" she asked, approaching the bed to check his vitals, trying to maintain professional distance even as she felt herself softening. "My nephew sneaks him in after visitor hours in that carrier under the window. Takes him home during the day." Albert's hand reached out to stroke the cat, who stretched lazily in response. "Oliver's been with me 15 years. More loyal than any human I've known, except perhaps my late wife." Emma recorded Albert's blood pressure, lower than yesterday, and adjusted his pain medication. As she worked, Oliver the cat studied her with amber eyes that seemed too knowing, too perceptive. "You're not going to report us, are you?" Albert asked, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his face. Emma should have said yes. Hospital policy was clear. Instead, she looked at the old man's hand resting on the cat's vibrant orange fur. Life against life, both precious in their own way. "Your secret's safe with me," she said. "But if anyone else notices, they won't," Albert replied with surprising conviction. "People see what they expect to see, and no one expects to see a cat in a hospital room." That night marked the beginning of something Emma couldn't yet name. She found herself lingering in room 412 during her shifts, first for minutes, then for her entire breaks. Albert had stories, so many stories, told not with the desperate rush of someone facing death, but with the measured cadence of a natural storyteller. He spoke of traveling the world as a younger man, of falling in love with his wife Eleanor in a small cafe in Prague, of building a modest photography business that allowed them to live simply but happily. He never mentioned children of his own, only the nephew who dutifully visited but seemed more obligated than attached. "You remind me of Eleanor," Albert told her one night, 3 weeks into their unlikely friendship. "Not in looks, she was blonde, tall as a willow, but in spirit. That quiet strength. The way you care without making a show of it." Emma felt her cheeks warm at the comparison. "I'm just doing my job." "No," Albert said firmly, his breathing more labored than it had been the day before. "Most do their job. You see people. There's a difference." Oliver the cat had grown accustomed to Emma, sometimes abandoning Albert's side to curl in her lap during their conversations. The tabby's purr vibrated against her scrubs, a small engine of comfort in a place too often filled with sorrow. "What will happen to Oliver?" Emma asked one night, the question that had been weighing on her mind finally finding voice. Albert's condition was deteriorating rapidly now. They both knew it. Albert's gaze drifted to the window, to the city beyond. "My nephew's allergic, and he travels too much anyway." A pause, heavy with unspoken request. Oliver needs someone who understands the value of companionship. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the soft purring of the cat and the distant sounds of the hospital at night. "I've never had a cat," Emma admitted, though something inside her had already made the decision. Albert smiled, relief softening the pain lines around his mouth. "Oliver's easy. Food, water, a warm lap? He's particular about his chin scratches, though, right side only." As if on cue, Oliver lifted his head, eyes blinking slowly at Emma in what she'd learned was a cat's version of affection. 2 nights later, Albert Harrison died. Emma wasn't there. It was her night off, but she felt the absence the moment she stepped onto the floor the following evening. Room 412's door was open, the bed stripped, the room already being prepared for the next patient. The cycle of the hospital, unending and efficient. Emma found herself standing in the empty room, tears she hadn't expected burning behind her eyes. They had known each other for just over a month. Why did it feel like losing an old friend? A voice behind her broke the silence. "Are you Emma Winters?" She turned to find a man in his 40s, Albert's nephew Michael, holding a cat carrier. Oliver's amber eyes peered out from behind the grate. "Uncle Albert was very specific," Michael said, his tone businesslike, lacking the rawness of recent grief. "He said you'd agreed to take the cat." "Yes," Emma said, the word coming automatically, though the reality of what she was agreeing to, a decade-plus commitment to a creature she barely knew, was only now sinking in. "Yes, I did." Michael handed over the carrier, along with a bag of cat supplies. "There's food, his favorite toys, and some paperwork Uncle Albert wanted you to have. Something about Oliver's veterinary history." That night, in her small apartment 16 floors above the city, Emma opened the carrier door and watched as Oliver cautiously emerged. The cat surveyed his new surroundings with the same thoughtful gaze he'd fixed on her in the hospital room, taking in the modest furniture, the plants on the windowsill, the stack of nursing textbooks by the sofa. "It's not much," Emma told him, feeling oddly self-conscious. "But it's quiet, and I'm here most nights when I'm not working." Oliver padded across the hardwood floor, sniffing corners, examining the small kitchen where Emma had set out food and water bowls. Finally, he jumped onto the couch and settled into the exact spot where Emma usually sat to read after her shifts. "Make yourself at home, I guess," she said with a small laugh that caught in her throat, turning into something closer to a sob. The loss hit her then, not just of Albert, but of what he had represented. A connection that had brightened the sterile hospital corridors, that had reminded her why she'd become a nurse in the first place. To care, to see people, to make the unbearable a little less so. Emma sat beside Oliver, who allowed her to stroke his orange fur, though he kept a dignified distance. In the bag Michael had given her, she found cans of premium cat food, toys that smelled of catnip, and a thick envelope marked Oliver's medical records. Inside was no veterinary paperwork, but a letter in a shaky hand. "Dear Emma, if you're reading this, I've moved on to whatever comes next. Thank you for making the last chapter more bearable. Your kindness meant more than I could express in our midnight conversations. I have no right to ask more of you than taking in an old man's cat, but I'm afraid I'm about to impose one final burden. Oliver comes with some baggage, the financial kind. Contrary to what my hospital bills might suggest, I die a wealthy man. My photography business was merely a passion. My real fortune came from patents and investments made decades ago. My nephew knows nothing of this, a deliberate choice on my part, as money has always ruled his heart. I've left everything to you, with Oliver as the condition. Consider him the gatekeeper to a new life, if you choose to accept it. My lawyer will contact you within the week. This isn't charity, Emma. It's recognition. In a world where most walk by, you stopped. You saw. You cared. Such qualities deserve nurturing. Take the money or don't. That's your choice. But please take care of Oliver. He's particular about his chin scratches, right side only. With gratitude and hope, Albert Harrison." Emma read the letter 3 times, her hands trembling more with each reading. It had to be a joke, or perhaps the medication-induced fantasy of a dying man. People didn't just leave fortunes to nurses they'd known for a month. She looked at Oliver, who gazed back with those knowing amber eyes. "Did you know about this?" she whispered. The cat blinked slowly. True to Albert's word, the lawyer called exactly 1 week later. Emma had just returned from a particularly difficult shift, her scrubs still on, Oliver curled on her lap as she sat shell-shocked on the couch, phone pressed to her ear. The estate is valued at approximately $27 million. The lawyer, Mr. Winters, said in the same tone one might use to comment on the weather. Mr. Harrison's instructions were quite specific. The entire sum passes to you, with the stipulation that Oliver the cat remains in your care for the duration of his natural life. This has to be a mistake, Emma said, her voice faint. I barely knew him. Mr. Harrison was of sound mind when he made these arrangements, the lawyer replied. He made the changes to his will the day after you agreed to take in Oliver. He described you as the kind of person who sees value beyond surface. After the call ended, Emma sat motionless, the weight of Oliver on her lap the only thing anchoring her to reality. $27 million. It was an incomprehensible sum to someone who carefully budgeted for groceries and whose biggest splurge was the occasional specialty coffee. What am I supposed to do with that kind of money? She asked Oliver, who responded by stretching and pressing his paw against her cheek, as if to say the answer was obvious. The inheritance process moved with surprising speed. Within a month, Emma found herself with access to accounts containing more money than she could spend in several lifetimes. She continued working her shifts at St. Mercy, much to the confusion of Mr. Winters. Most people would retire immediately, he noted during a meeting to discuss investment options. Emma shook her head. I need normality right now, and I became a nurse to help people, not because of the paycheck. But the money did change things, in ways both subtle and profound. She moved from her tiny apartment to a spacious condo with floor-to-ceiling windows where Oliver could bask in sunlight. She paid off her student loans in a single transaction that left her staring at her bank confirmation email for hours, unable to process the absence of debt that had shadowed her adult life. Most significantly, she established a foundation in Albert's name, aimed at providing comfort care and fulfilling final wishes for terminal patients without family support. The idea had come to her during a night shift, watching an elderly woman stare out her window. No visitors, no photographs, nothing but the sterile efficiency of end-of-life care. Through it all, Oliver remained her constant companion. The cat adapted to their new home with dignified acceptance, claiming favorite spots by windows and on the plush new furniture Emma could now afford. At night, he slept curled against her side, his presence a living reminder of the man who had transformed her life. 6 months after Albert's death, Emma received another call from Mr. Winters. There's something else, the lawyer said. A property Mr. Harrison owned that wasn't included in the initial estate disclosure. He left specific instructions that you were to be informed about it only after 6 months had passed. The property turned out to be a cottage on a small lake 2 hours outside the city. As Emma drove there on her next day off, Oliver secure in his carrier in the passenger seat, she wondered what other surprises Albert had left behind. The cottage was modest but beautiful, with weathered cedar siding and a wraparound porch facing the water. Inside, Emma found not the dusty, abandoned space she'd expected, but a well-maintained home. Fresh flowers sat in a vase on the kitchen table. The refrigerator hummed, stocked with basics. Most surprising was the room that had clearly been Albert's studio. Photographs lined the walls, landscapes, portraits, moments captured with an artist's eye. In the center stood a large, old-fashioned camera on a tripod, pointed at the lake visible through the window. As Emma explored, Oliver seemed oddly at home, moving through the cottage with the confidence of familiarity. He led her to a desk in the corner of the studio, jumping up beside a leather-bound album. Inside were photographs of Albert and a striking blonde woman, Eleanor, Emma assumed. Their life together documented in black and white and color, young and laughing in European streets, middle-aged and content on this very porch, older but still vibrant, his arm always around her waist, her head often leaning on his shoulder. The final pages held a surprise. Photos of St. Mercy Hospital, of Emma herself, caught in unguarded moments, smiling at a colleague, reading in the break room, standing at that window where she'd often gather her thoughts, forehead pressed against the glass as she watched the city below. The last photo was of Emma and Oliver in Albert's hospital room. She was mid-laugh at something Albert must have said, the cat looking up at her with those knowing eyes. Written beneath it in that now familiar shaky handwriting, the beginning of her story. Tears blurred Emma's vision. She hadn't realized Albert had been documenting their friendship, preserving it with the same care he'd given to all the important moments of his life. A small envelope fell from the final page. Inside was a key and another note. Emma, this place was where Eleanor and I were happiest. We called it our reminder home, a reminder of what matters when the world gets too loud. I've arranged for its upkeep indefinitely through a trust. It's yours now to use as you see fit. Perhaps as a retreat from hospital corridors, or maybe something more. Eleanor always said we should have opened our home to others who needed healing. Perhaps you'll find purpose in that thought. Oliver knows all the best spots to nap here. The afternoon light in the east bedroom is his favorite. Albert. As if on cue, Oliver meowed and jumped down, padding toward a patch of sunlight streaming through a window in what must be the east bedroom. Emma followed, the key clutched in her hand, and found the cat already curled in a perfect rectangle of warmth on a handmade quilt. She sat beside him, running her fingers through his fur, feeling the rumble of his purr vibrate through her fingertips. Outside, the lake shimmered in the afternoon sun. Birds called to each other from the surrounding trees. The constant tension Emma carried in her shoulders, the physical manifestation of hospital stress and city living, began to ease. An idea took root then, growing with each steady breath. The foundation she'd established, Albert's suggestion about opening the home to those who needed healing, her own training as a nurse, they converged into a vision so clear it seemed to have been waiting for her to discover it. That evening, as dusk painted the lake in purples and deep blues, Emma sat on the porch with her phone, making calls. To Mr. Winters about legal requirements. To colleagues at St. Mercy about leaves of absence and consulting opportunities. To contractors about renovations and accessibility features. Oliver sat beside her through it all, occasionally pressing his head against her hand when her voice grew too excited or too uncertain. As darkness fell completely, Emma finally set the phone down and looked at the cat. "I think we're going to do something important here," she told him. "Something that would make Albert proud." Oliver blinked slowly in agreement. 1 year to the day after Albert Harrison died, the Eleanor and Albert Harrison Retreat for End-of-Life Respite opened its doors. The cottage had been expanded thoughtfully, with 5 private suites for terminal patients who wished to spend their final days surrounded by nature rather than hospital walls. A small, dedicated nursing staff, all personally selected by Emma, provided round-the-clock care. A chef prepared meals that actually brought pleasure to those whose appetites had been diminished by illness and treatment. Most importantly, there were no restrictions on pets, family visits, or how rooms could be personalized. Death, Emma had learned from Albert, deserved dignity and individuality. She split her time between overseeing the retreat and continuing shifts at St. Mercy, where she now specialized in identifying patients who might benefit from the retreat's services. The foundation covered all costs for those without means. For Emma, the fortune that had once seemed like an impossible burden had become the tool for creating exactly the kind of care she'd always wished she could provide. Oliver, now showing touches of gray around his muzzle, had appointed himself official greeter of the retreat. He seemed to have an uncanny sense for which patients needed his particular brand of quiet companionship, often found curled at the feet of those having the hardest days. On this anniversary evening, after the day's visitors had left and the night shift had taken over, Emma found herself drawn to the porch, a cup of tea warming her hands against the autumn chill. Oliver appeared silently beside her, pressing against her ankle. "You think he knows what we've done with his gift?" she asked the cat, who looked up at her with those same knowing eyes that had watched her from Albert's hospital bed a year ago. A shooting star streaked across the clear night sky, a brief, brilliant arc of light. Emma smiled. "I'll take that as a yes." She reached down to scratch Oliver's chin, right side only, and felt the familiar rumble of his purr. From inside, she could hear soft music playing from one of the patient suites, the low murmur of a nurse's voice, the occasional gentle laughter. Sounds of life, happening alongside death. Not in denial of it, but in harmony with it. A young nurse had adopted a dying patient's cat, only to inherit their secret fortune. But what Emma had really inherited was far more valuable: purpose, direction, and the knowledge that one life, thoughtfully lived and generously concluded, could set in motion ripples that would touch countless others. Oliver pressed his head more firmly against her hand, as if in agreement with her unspoken thoughts. Together, they watched the stars reflect on the still surface of the lake, witnesses to the quiet miracle of being exactly where they were meant to be. And somewhere, Emma was certain, Albert and Eleanor Harrison were watching too, their story continuing through the lives now being transformed in the home where they had once been happiest, through a cat's loyal heart and a nurse who had learned to see the extraordinary value in simple human connection.